I'm glad and grateful to be here so as to Guber there with my heart's wish. Here in a room that is calamitizing me with the need to be cleaned. I've been trying not to knock myself out with the fair condition of my Commonwealth. I see what's going on as a crisis of consent of the governed. Now, what does that mean that the consent of the governed is a perennial question to the democratic welfare of our Commonwealth. If you're at all like me, you're grateful that there are mature publications like the Crisis Magazine and National Review, the New Republic, Nation Magazine, and so forth, newspapers, where people are paid handsomely to advise us in open forums, admitting letters from the readership, that there are powerful and profound universities like Stanford, University of Miami, George Mason, where again people are paid handsomely to explain difficult academic issues to us. The basic issue of the consent of the governed pertains to the fact that we try our level best to hear what the issues are and decide by referendum and vote who will represent us, who understands best, and then do our level best to conform with their expectations of us until the next round of politicking for office. It's a position of authority by consent of the governed. Occasionally, conscientious objections arise that are perennial issues like when to disobey moral orders. And there are odd men out like Thoreau or Greta Thunberg, people who we hear from both within and outside our borders, and who we want to hear and whose views we want to apprehend because we cherish our values and perhaps even sometimes cherish their stand. So the perennial issues and questions exist for our education and the meaning of search for our tacit approval and our accepting of responsibility when things go wrong. How to explain when things go haywire is a little more complicated. Two men I've admired in my life, one of whom I've walked away from, were JFK and Robert Fripp. One was an American, one was an English. Back in the days when the US and the UK were considered partners in learning and had the same adversaries, the totalitarians, the barbarians, who hated learning, called us Knights of the Inkwell, and mocked us shamelessly. Now, I went to college because I'm deaf and learned sign language late in life with millennials. I'm 60, almost 62 years old. But I grew up in the 60s and I remember the 80s. And one of the things I know is that a lot of the things that happened very fast in the 80s, not in the 60s, and we only learned about them in the 80s. America became a world power over a century ago, but our induction into international power as a status after World War II was disrupted by the war that never should have been in Vietnam, which allied with our former adversaries, the Axis, when we backed up the Vichy French. The so-called happy days of Eisenhower, when he gave indications to Joe McCarthy, who was just a mountebank of the Red Scare, that he would back up the French to placate McCarthyism and the anti-communism of the hour. Having gotten us out of the Korean War, Eisenhower no doubt thought that nothing would come of it. But Nixon and Johnson dragged us into the Vietnam War. Noam Chomsky says JFK did. And since then, we've had to deal, among other things, with the coming home syndrome, the idea that the veterans felt shortchanged by the people who they were sent off to defend. So, some of this is the roots of the crisis of consent of the government that we're living through. But the power of JFK and Robert Fripp both argue from the idea of the aristocracy of talent, the idea that special people get special who accomplish special achievements are entitled the last word on certain subjects of influence. And some people who continued to question what had happened in the 60s, in the 80s, learned from such groups as Frank Church, who ran a committee on Congress, that there was a program, a notorious program, called MK Ultra, which apparently stood for Mein Kampf Ultra Secret. Now, we learned some certain particulars about the MK Ultra. One of the particulars we learned about the MK Ultra was that it was a secret agency cabinet of officials who plied the left in schools and the people who were protesting the war with powerful LSD and other illegal narcotics. Thus, the reputation the 60s had for being misled by rock stars and psychedelics was a government program, an observation. And part of this is clearly coming to light again now, when we've come to be led to the understanding that revolution number 9 was the MK Ultra, and the MK Ultra was revolution number 9. What that means is that events in Czechoslovakia were relevant. That back in the USSR, which came out in 11/22, the anniversary, the 5th anniversary of Kennedy's murder, 11/22/1968, was a slap in the face, as much of the Beatles' lyrics were. That during Prague spring of 1968 to fall of 1968, when we lost Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, revolution of number 9, led by Yoko Ono and guerrilla psychopaths from Attica, was executed. And much of this goes back to the city of Pittsburgh, where I was kidnapped and tortured as a child. Now, we live in a time right now where there's considerable consternation because every time you pick up a paper, even turn to Yahoo News, you hear neo-fascist was elected in Italy. If you try to get to the bottom of what that means, that's terrifying. And fascism was the Third Reich. Children who were Jewish were thrown into gas chambers. It's a terrifying idea. What gives? This must mean something, but when you flip through the pages, it's largely just fluff and innuendo. Who is Maloney, and who's this caustic snot? Truss in England. These two caustic snoots are apparently it means something. We're being called neo-fascists. Okay, I'm trying to figure out where it's going on based on what little I know about what the media means when they say that. And I don't want to get into anything that's too heavily theoretical. My experience with Robert Fripp probably informs me about England pretty well. When I was seduced by Dealey, the parochial snoots came and said, the pernicious Christians who kicked our grannies off without any kind of remorse. But cyberstock, when you look at the various Monica Lewinskys in the Asian quarters of cyber pornography, and then get out their devils, pitchfork to come and poke you for not donating to the Salvation Army and so on. You know the type. The self-righteous little girls and so forth. Um, they played it through the high and mighty, King Thorls and so forth. That it was an if-then organized crime. If I get seduced by Dee Dee while I was a child, then they would deafen me and torture me, and I would be devalued. And they were using names like devolve for devalue, to indicate the what they call the numbers racket involved in the city of Pittsburgh, behind the scenes in the city of Pittsburgh. And you can fact check that. John Schulman lives at home under house arrest because his ripping off $8 million of museum heist was funding Vicky Chop's pornography by men apparently involving Hop Kendricks and sound mental health. He was funding $8 million was going to faculty. His heist material was going to insiders who knew what he was doing, and the money has never been chased down. And he knows, and it has the murder of Susie Kennedy by his chums in the Seattle Postal Union was a message to the FBI that he knows who was involved in the Licky Chops genocide porno. So you can fact check my claim that Pittsburgh was running the hooligan numbers racket and still are with the help of Seattle. And it wasn't an if-then situation. They had already bowdlerized me horribly with Michael Reagan's favorite things to do to 9-year-olds. And they had battered me, tortured me, poisoned me, beat them, kicked me in the head, terrorized me, and put me into a thumb-sucking state of trauma. So it wasn't an if-then situation as they claim. And what I tried to do was go undercover to find out what was going on as I got a little older. And they said, see, it's if-then, it's if-then, it's if-then. They had a dude named Max living upstairs from England with Artec, who had built the Salk Labs and locked me a house from the inside at Leslie Park with Casper, who had tortured and kidnapped me as a child. Now, Leslie Park is an important signifier over there in D.H. Lawrenceville because Leslie Katz was a partner of John Schulman who was doing obscene things to me. She was doing obscene things to me, and then she claimed that her virginity proved rape. It was her obscene things being done to me that I was protesting when she started to mock me. But she sided with Fripp. And one of their buddies, David Cohen, and they go way back to before I was even attacked when I was about 8 years old. And he came outside and wanted me to smoke a cigarette. And then had parents elope to catch me smoking a cigarette, made me tell my mom. Such that when another kid stole a blender from Cohen, my mother said he usually owns up to Cohen's mother. What's that supposed to mean? I usually own up to my misdeeds because David Cohen got me to smoke a cigarette. and some other kid robbed a blender from David Cohen's house. Did Cohen ever own up to his role in this? This was high wheeling dealing police state operations. This was overseen by Bernard Watmaker, a psychiatrist from Attica State Prison. They were taking me hostage. And Cohen had a saying, they're back in the days when they had this, he liked the saying, you take Salem out of the country, but you can't take the country out of Salem. So much that he made country into two words. And we know what they're doing. And the critical race theory and Black Lives Matters, I want to tell you, logic is not their strong point. The person speaking for them in this, things like the murder of Susie Kennedy, is like Howard Lincoln, a white tycoon from the Mariners, who calls me a milk with toast, implies that I'm a milk with toast. Toast, like you burn the witch in Salem, right? So this goes way back, and it's not an if-then structure. This is their mentality. These parochials have been engaged in purposeful exclusion, is what Greg Coral called it. Sacrificialism, Greg Coral called it. He says a bewildering myriad of surface details arise at the fundamental themes. That means he thinks that the parochial sniveling finger, the innuendo, is the fundamental theme. It's not. Entrapment, prior brutality, abuse are the fundamental themes. So don't buy it. But he has a good power plan going, snickering. And it's a crisis of the consent of the governed. People are consenting to be lied to and absorbing what that means to be lied to in a situation where we're being subject to a process of elimination by tycoons. And the Green Party, called themselves Green and the Red, are in place to attack any opposition. The Black Panthers are allies of Donald Trump in the whole thing. They don't believe in democratic processes. They hate them. They just want to sit on top of the mountain and burn the witches. They say things like, let's have a barbecue. So now the good people of the recovery program who were so good as to poison me in the mouth and cover for John Schulman, they never apologized to me, even though he ran me. I mean, you think getting Phi Theta Kappa at a community college and getting honors and graduating is hard work for a deaf person who barely knows sign language. You should see what living that way for 2 years homeless was like. And they gave me no street cred whatsoever. These evil idiots don't believe in street cred. They ply it. They talk about street scholars, man, but they hate the idea of the aristocracy of talent. They hate the idea of sincerity. And behind the black man's face, the face behind the face, the tycoons like Howard Lincoln. So, but these noble people of the drop-in center who are making the licky chops pornography of the little boy come out and say, you may not like it, but you still have to go out and protest in the streets and cheer Floyd. Now, why? They had to say if there's a black involvement in the attacks, the process of elimination attacks like the pepper virus, COVID-19, shouldn't we stop aggrandizing the black male image long enough to acknowledge that happened? Look at the film Diva that plays out in French, the black woman diva. And then that has all of the whites sort of in line, that my birthday line about the letters in the kids' mailbag, because we know that Ono grabbed her own letters and started playing this Axis wheel of fate. So you have this situation where they have little semiotic tankers. And one of the things that shows up is Brian Ferry's album with the song This Island Earth, I Can't Breathe. And they had Jill Floyd saying, I can't breathe, while they were processes of eliminating all of these people with a respiratory infection, right? supposedly to unify us. And I said it stands for Geo Floyd, Pink Floyd. Roger Waters is doing this with Putin. So what do we get? We get bubbly oceans from gas leaks, and Waters and Putin saying, "Give it up." You know, again, Cornel West saying, "Give it up for the black man." You know, and this is the facts of our tragedy. So, when you look at Biden's logic in promoting Kamala Harris, you see his logic in promoting the woman from India who was in a gang with Shulman, who seduced me for the prog rock exhaust of Pink Floyd The Walrus, where the black man gets the presidency and Maduro Goto the trophy of the tycoonage, like Howard Lincoln comes trotting out with Ichiro to bang their breasts. We were protecting ourselves. We had a right to self-defense from who? From the queer bait, the little boy, who did it to himself. Now, I wrote a letter called Chasing an Echo to Penis Gabriel, where I tried to get help with the Whisper campaign that Matt Marcus and WQED were circulating about me. Matt Marcus is a fabled Jewish goon of the Bernie Sanders variety, Howard Stern variety, songs like I Hate Your Blouse and records like Pigeonholed. He would burn girls' arms gangrens and said to bring them back to reality. And Penis Gabriel would give him backup lyrics. Experience Park. We burned those girls' arms with the Experience Park, and we're talking to artists, technologists, and Doctors Without Borders to promote it. And so you have and what they were promoting was the pernicious extremism of Leslie and her obscene conduct towards me. And in this, I had a remark about when all the Leslies of the world began to scream. Those are horns that spin like cop sirens. They're a form of amplifier, Leslies. Now, the Beatles deceived us with the idea that back in the USSR was conscious irony. Gabriel was always deceiving us with conscious irony. Well, what that means is like JFK had a self deprecating humor where he'd make fun of himself the way he made fun of other people, but lightheartedly. And people like Ono would say that right, it's what he's saying is actually about himself is actually true. So it's the opposite. You know, your friends, you assume, are being disarming with their humor when they put you down. But you know, back in the USSR was meant to divide people between those who were allowed to join in the inside circle of leapfrog oligarchs and those who would be cast into the pit of damnation for saying any word at all in favor of Russian studies. So you have, you know, like the season of truculent machines. Penis Gabriel sends me the stuff about the treason of succulent machines. Doesn't that sound tongue in cheek? Well, he wasn't tongue in cheek. They were planning a bonfire of the Bandies. They were planning a process of elimination with Bushy Tune. So we start seeing some of the innuendos come, you know, out at places like Tacoma, where a girl named Ob, for observation, gave me a ladybug before, you know, because this is the sort of symbolism that, you know, people take in the wake of Poseidon by King Crimson. And he says things about harvest hags hoarding ash and sand, and then all of this kind of neat stuff. And you get like the guy from the Archie comics who has three wheels of words, you know. And on one it says vermilion and ochre, red, petulia. The other has tangerine, fornication, animosity. And then the third wheel is ship, Fido. And you end up with Petulia, Fido, Grunt. And he says that should be the name of your psychedelic rock band, you know, these wheels of words. And it sort of moves you away from the idea that their observation really meant something when they said poison and death seed, but it really did mean something. It was a government operation. it was not girly men, but rather what's the word I want? Axis Confederates. You know, the true Gillos of Liverpool. So music is not value neutral. I mean, it is value neutral. Music is value neutral, but the lyrics you add to the music aren't value neutral, and you can do a lot of manipulating by hiding things in a very sly way and getting people to clap their hands to things it's not in their best interest to clap their hands to. So if you see what I'm saying, you understand that the consent of the government, the what I mean to say is the crisis of the consent of the government. It has a lot to do with uh, not having the skills to do rational critique over their own subconscious influences. Um, People don't understand that MK Ultra meant the same thing as Revolution Number Nine. Now, we live in a society that has a Bill of Rights. Not everybody is down with the Bill of Rights on planet Earth, but we do try to explain through critical theory why the Bill of Rights is important. And what we're set up by the Axis to do is say, Bill of Rights for who? And if it's the Bill of Rights isn't adopted by everybody and isn't for everybody, then we should smash your headquarters. And then, of course, if we have an Axis forming, a neo fascism forming in our own house, then there's some legitimacy to the anger. But replace it with what? Replace it with the outside forces of manipulation who formed a leapfrog oligarchy from the fourth dimension. In other words, invisible powers. And these invisible powers do trace back to our alliance with Britain and King Edward's influence over the heinous moral imposters of Hollywood like D.W. Griffith. These were the people who came up with the idea of sabotaging men's attempts at civilization in a grand spectacle of the Old Testament God and deluge by fossil fuel. Surely you don't think all this fossil fuel climate change stuff that's been building up is just by accident. The scientists we're supposed to listen to have been around a long time, making money behind the scenes and dreaming this up. Reagan was absolutely open about it. You have the Beatles and their monopoly over um, the right to exclude or include. I mean, they excluded the Kennedys, and you have James Watt, the Secretary of the Interior, and under Reagan saying we don't know when Weasel is going to come back. You know, these people knew their game, and it's the end of the week for them. This is Friday. Get them out by Friday. You know, and so they're obsessive about the imagery of sin and burning. Like people criticize me because I love the Miss Beautiful Coyote, and I really do. I'm a lonely old man. I've been alone for 30 years, so I was quite a lover in my day. So I look at the Miss Beautiful Coyote, but people say, "What do you want from that?" I want to bring out. I want to see the good in people. You know, I did a portfolio for Francie DeCecchi from Playboy magazine. I put clothes on her and did beautiful images of her. She really liked them. She called me her Picasso. And what did they do? The hand of God came, and the computer I was using to do it with went up in flames at the end of the project. This is the sort of thing that the high scientists of the Mysterians in the fourth dimension pull. And you know, so it's not like it's not like things like the fact that they poison me in the mouth right before, in the lead up to COVID is not relevant, or advertisement of what sort of um, govern government is leading to some of the um, crisis in our consent to be governed by them. Why should we consent to have our grannies kicked off the earth, for pity's sake? So, all I'm trying to do is straighten you out, because Seattle's off its rocker. Seattle's off its rocker. Really is. And so is Pittsburgh. It's heartbreaking. These people who are supposed, they're supposed to tend our schools and our educations. And they're forming fight clubs, and Udall would like to close our schools with things like COVID-19, and then called objective journalism paranoid schizophrenia. They called that genetic paranoid schizophrenia. What's the matter with you?